What I want to talk about today is this. I want to talk about these two kinds of spaces that we inhabit. We inhabit a space of a house. In this case, this is a fairly famous house. This is a house by Thomas Jefferson called Monticello. It's in Virginia. I have happened to have been there. And if you'll notice, we're looking at the website to the Monticello organization on a cell phone or a smartphone. And ultimately, our lives inhabit these two kinds of spaces. A house is a space where we keep our belongings, that we depart from and we return to every day. But more and more of our identities are developing on our smartphones. And more of our lives are playing out in a different kind of space, in a digital space, in the space of networks. So for me, as an architect, this is an important situation. It's a profoundly transforming situation to us as human beings as we run our lives more and more in digital spaces as opposed to physical spaces. So when I began in architecture, I drew by hand. I used graphite on paper. And ultimately, when I would go about making a building and working with the various consultants and contractors who make a building, I would have face-to-face meetings. I would use phones and fax machines. But today, my approach to doing architecture is radically different. I do it digitally. I use computers to produce buildings. I do BIM modeling, building information modeling, in such a way that I'm not drawing two-dimensionally with graphite. Instead, I'm drawing three-dimensionally with vector graphics. And these vector graphics are smart graphics. They are objects that carry data with them that are then connected to data sets that exist online. So when I update a component in a building, I'm getting real-time information from manufacturers. Now, there are other ways in which our architects are doing buildings as well. They do buildings with a process we call parametricism. And ultimately, the way that we do buildings is essentially how someone might build a website, where they are developing a script, an algorithmic process where a building is really not so much drawn as it is scripted out. And in that scripting, what we have is a situation where the building can be modified from a set of operations. So this is a radically different approach to architecture. So the question that I'm posing, and that I continue to pose, is this. Our architects clearly need digital tools in our contemporary world to do their job. But the major question that I have is this. Do digital tools need architecture? Do digital tools need architecture? So this is the question that I want to play out. But architecture is not about its production. Architecture is not about how it's made. Walt Whitman, in 1855, wrote this line: "All architecture is what you do to it when you look upon it." And I think that this is a profoundly important statement, enlightening to architects, where a building is not about how it's drawn, it's not about its stones, it's not about its construction, it's about how we appreciate it. So architecture is really space designed to be appreciated. When I think about architects, I think about our profession is as caretakers of human space and how we humans occupy space and how that space reflects back upon us. But today, we live in multiple kinds of spaces, and they fall far outside the profession of architecture, which focuses on physical space. Now, I want to try to unpack what these kinds of spaces are, and I'm going to give you an example. This is my magic trick. I'm going to use bricks, I'm going to use coins, and I'm going to use smartphones. So, let's start with the first kind of space. Let's go back to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. This is actually a very handsome building. It's a seminal example of American architecture of the 1800s. It's a fantastic building following a classical style. Jefferson was looking at Renaissance architecture, Roman architecture, the architecture of Andre Palladio. It's a very geometric plan. The interesting thing about the house is it's named after the hill that it resides on in Virginia. It's a building that's very rooted to its place. Now, Jefferson was trying to hearken back to classical architecture, but at the same time, he was making an innovative modern building. There are gadgets throughout this house that improve the efficiency of his life and his productivity. So as much as it is a house that looks back to tradition, it also is a house that is quite innovative. Now, simultaneously, you'll notice that the plan is very geometric. It has all the attributes I would say are architectural. Now, all of us have seen this house, whether we've seen it in photograph form or have gone to visit it, because we have it in our pockets and in our purses. We have essentially nickels in our pockets. Nickels, in my mind, constitute a different kind of space, a space that has existed since we've been exchanging money. We call money currency. And we call it currency because it flows. It flows because it gets minted, gets reproduced. So Monticello leaves its mountain and gets reproduced, gets distributed, and then it gets exchanged. And as currency gets exchanged, it gets exchanged between players who tend to know each other. They know each other in such a way that they form a social network. So economics is one of the social sciences. So when you study the interactions of people, you are also studying economics as well. Now let's give these actors in this network a cell phone. A cell phone that allows us to exist in two places at once, but simultaneously allows us to move around. And let's see what happens. So as this plays out, we can see that the network stays the same, but its form, its rigidity transforms from triangles to squares to trapezoidal forms, that ultimately we have a different kind of space, a topological space, a space that's not fixed by geometry, but is radically different. And architects don't have the tools to adapt to this kind of space, necessarily. And architecture ultimately becomes one kind of space competing for our attention, competing for our appreciation. Because as we live our lives, I would say we are living them in kind of a schizophrenic way. We live in between these two worlds, the world our body inhabits and the world that our identities inhabit. So it's a very strange world. It's a world where flow has replaced the importance of form, where mobility has replaced the notion of fixity, where distribution is more important than destination, where the global supersedes the local. So for architects, I think at least that this is a time period that is of profound change in my discipline. Now, looking at another example here, we can see that a person inhabiting a place, in this case, inhabiting this room, which exists in Bossier City, which exists in North Louisiana, that exists on the Western Hemisphere, that we have an idea of space as a series of consecutive enclosures or envelopes. As a matter of fact, it's the same kind of space whenever we address an envelope that is very clear and very understandable. But the local is distinct from the global. Now, we also exist in another kind of space, these intersecting Klein bottles, as I have them here, of a person with a digital device, be it a smartphone, a tablet, a mobile computer. And ultimately, what this does is it kind of turbocharges our relationship to information. That local device that we have in our hands connects to a broader global telecom system that allows us to access global information as well as local information. This is a profound change where the local and the global are indistinct. It's an entirely different world, and it's, I would argue, an entirely different posture. Someone looking at a tablet or looking at a smartphone is going to hold it in their hands, they're going to use their thumbs, they're going to focus their head down, and they're going to be looking at a very different kind of space, the space of networks. And they're going to be tuning out the physical space that exists around them. You've seen them. You know that you can't text and drive. You can't be in one space and then also be inhabiting another. So this becomes an either-or proposition. And I think that this is a dilemma where our lives are split. But I kind of wonder if that has to be the case. In 2004, I came across this painting by Benjamin Edwards, Immersion. I interviewed Benjamin Edwards, and I told him that I really found this painting a transformative landscape image. It changed the way that I thought about space and how we inhabit space in the 21st century. And he said, "Did you see the painting in person?" I said, "No, I saw the painting online." and he was a little disappointed with that. However, when I saw this painting, it said to me, "My heavens, this is the world we inhabit. We inhabit the physical and the digital. How could they converge?" Meaning going from an either-or situation to a both-and. Now, Benjamin Edwards, like any great artist, inspires one to think about things differently. He did this painting most likely as a critique of the spaces we inhabit and the onslaught of digital over and above the physical landscape. But I look at it and I ask this question, can it be both and? Can we move from bicameral presences to varietal co-presences? This is an important question because I wonder if it is possible for us to live in both spaces simultaneously. And as it's played out since 2004, I do think that is more and more the case. In 2004, there wasn't this ubiquitous computing like we have it today. Smartphones were rare. Now, more than half of the US population has smartphones in their pockets, and that is just growing more and more. But there are different kinds of realms we inhabit. We inhabit the home, which I call fixed ubiquity, the phone, the drone, which I'm expanding to also include robotics and to include digital fabrication, and also to include our military and governmental drones. There are groups of people who are creating do-it-yourself drones as well, and I think our cities will be transformed as we see drones being used more and more for commercial purposes. And then something I call the zone, or social networks. These sort of poles of this urban realm that's both digital and physical, I think is a profound and important shift. But I'm not just satisfied with just both and. I want both and. Because I want to see a variety of possibilities. Because if we're really going to inhabit both realms, I think we have to look at opportunities that don't exist today. That we have to look at these liminal opportunity areas, these places that exist in between what we already know. The smartphone, there are enough companies working on that problem already. Fixed computing, they've been doing that for years. Social media, we all know it. Drones, they're being developed as we speak right now. But it's these other areas, because I believe that the frontier for innovation in this is between. And we, not so much architects alone, but software developers, hardware developers, and most importantly, artists who think about these things in ways that open up new possibilities, new ways of dreaming, I think are so important. We need to find ways to collaborate as creative people, as designers, to discern what new opportunities there are in between. And trust me, I think that there is a host of possibilities. We have the digital, or virtual reality, and we have the physical, we have the real city. And ultimately, I think that we need to develop a third option, which is our most important option, something I call the varietal, which can, in different measures, draw the digital and the physical into different combinations, different flavors, so to speak, different mixtures that will enrich our lives and enrich the urban realm more than it already is. So I want to see cities become a multi-textured interface again, and do it in a way that we are able to coexist in both worlds at the same time. Gaston Bachelard wrote a book that's very important to us in architecture called The Poetics of Space. He wrote it in, I think, the mid-20th century. If he was writing it now, it would be a radically different book because he would have to say we inhabit different kinds of spaces. But in The Poetics of Reverie, he wrote this beautiful phrase, imagination tempts the future. We need to imagine what isn't yet in order to create a new future. Since 2008, if you look at the 3 major smartphone platforms, 1 million apps have been created. I want to see, in the same time frame of 4 years, 1 million apps and reapplications for the city. Things where we're not focused on just one media, but focused on the media of the city itself. I think that this would be a profound shift in the way that we live collectively and individually, and our societies would completely transform. 1 million apps. Heck, I'd be happy with 100,000. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past." And I think that this is an important statement because I think we need to dream differently. Let's reinvent our cities into dreams of the future. Thank you very much.